welcome back to Lush Life, No Labels. This is a podcast where I talk about the struggles and joys of self-improvement, anywhere from relationships, career, wellness, and more. I'm Fatu. If you've listened to this podcast before, I typically introduce myself as Michelle, which is a name I came up with. It was my Starbucks name, even though I don't drink coffee, but I've decided to just start going by my government name from here on out. Thanks again for tuning in to my podcast. The topic of this episode is difficult conversations, and I chose that because this week I watched a YouTube clip of an old TV show. I think it was MTV, where family and friends of people would hold an intervention. In this particular episode, the person's family held an intervention because she was eating cement. They were concerned for her and decided to sit her down. Each of them took a turn explaining how that behavior made them feel and what concerns they had for her mental and physical health. In the episode, it was tense because the person being intervened on felt ganged up on because it was a bunch of people saying these things to her, but it was a conversation that the family and friends felt needed to happen. It's not common for people to eat cement, so you can probably guess how messy that whole episode was. But as I watched the clip, it got me to reflect on a class I took in grad school called Difficult Conversations. That class was very interesting. I didn't know what I was getting myself into at the beginning, but it turned out to be basically 40 hours of group therapy. Watching that YouTube clip I just mentioned and thinking about my class really brought me to this point of how important it is to have these difficult conversations, because otherwise they can create misunderstandings or more stress if we don't address these issues. So, what is a difficult conversation, anyways? A difficult conversation typically arises around conflict, if people have differing opinions on something, or if there are emotional or financial stakes. These types of conversations are called difficult because oftentimes they're hard to have. I'm sure you and other people you know have had multiple difficult conversations throughout your life. And these can be hard because, one, there can be a fear of conflict or negative outcome if this conversation is brought up. If we feel emotional, that can cloud our judgment on not wanting to discuss the specific topic. Past experiences can make us hesitant to talk about them if we've been treated a certain way for speaking up, or if the person we're having the conversation with has treated us a certain way before. If there's no safety there, that can be a tough spot to be in. It can also be difficult if we are trying to avoid a topic that we don't want to address. In the example I gave about the lady eating the cement, she was avoiding talking to her friends and family about it because she knew this was not something that they would approve of, and she knew they had tried to voice their concerns before. So she would shut down on them. That's why they took it to the level they did to have the intervention, because they felt like that was the last way for them to do it. That example, I would say, is extreme. I don't hear about that very often, but there are many different examples of difficult conversations. In one of my previous episodes on healthy family relationships, I mentioned how a family member of mine brought up an issue on how I had treated them in the past when we were younger. I had to hear some not so pleasant things about myself, and I had to work through this with this family member. I was not acting in that way anymore, but it was still something that the person felt they had to have addressed with me in order for us to move on and build our relationship better. I had to recognize the part that I played in that situation. And even though it was awkward, I was embarrassed and I felt bad, I didn't lash out or say what they said wasn't true. Feel free to listen to that episode if you want more detail. But I also did not accuse them of anything. Another difficult situation could be, for example, maybe you are in a relationship with someone, a romantic relationship. You want to break up, but you don't know how to do it, or maybe you haven't even realized it. So I saw a video about a couple, let's call them Bonnie and Clyde. This couple had recently moved in together after dating for a few years, but after a few weeks, Clyde realized it was a mistake and didn't know how to bring it up to Bonnie because she seemed very happy about this new step they had taken in their relationship and the new arrangement. But Clyde realized he did not want to be in the relationship anymore and that it was a mistake to move in. Since they had moved in together, though, things were more complicated because now their money was tied together because they were both renting in this place and paying the utilities. And it makes it so much harder when you have just combined your life with someone. So Clyde was dragging his feet on doing that breakup, but he knew that the conversation had to happen because he didn't want things to keep going on and felt that it was unfair to keep Bonnie moving along in this situation. Another type of difficult conversation could be around negotiations. For example, if you just got a new job and you have the proposed benefits package, you might want to negotiate either for your salary, your bonus, or time off. And that is a conversation that can be difficult because it's always hard to have these conversations with folks because you're asking them for more than what they are saying they're willing to give you. If you're a performer or you have your own business where you provide services, you may negotiate how much you get paid for the service that you provide to your customers. And that can also be nerve-wracking because you don't want to turn someone off, but you want to make sure that you are getting adequate payment for the services that you provide. So, as you can see, difficult conversations can come in many different forms. And like I said, I'm sure we all have some examples of ones that we have had before. Once you know what a difficult conversation is, how do you have that conversation? The biggest thing for me and part of what I learned in that class was to mentally and emotionally prepare for the conversations. If you are the person who is bringing it up, it's important to clarify the goals that you have. Understand what you want to discuss, why, what the other person's perspective is, and what you hope to get out of the conversation. In my example of the YouTube clip and the cement, the family had that intervention and they came into it with different notes on flashcards for each of them to say to the woman who was eating the cement. And in that little flashcard, they would describe what they wanted to discuss, the issue at hand, why they wanted to discuss that, and why they were in that room that day. It's important to anchor yourself in the conversation because these things can get pretty tense sometimes and you don't want it to go left. I mentioned the flashcards that family and friends had. It can be good to have a little script or outline for yourself. You don't necessarily need a flashcard, but if it's a difficult one, you can get nervous, and it helps if you kind of have a few bullet points in your head of what you want to talk to this person about. One of the harder parts of a difficult conversation, that for me at least, has been finding the right time and place. A lot of us actually put off these types of conversations because we don't know when is a good time to bring it up, where should I bring it up at. Honestly, it can seem like there's no good time to bring it up. In the example of Bonnie and Clyde, there's not really a good time to bring up to your long-term live-in girlfriend that you don't want to live together anymore after you've just moved in a few weeks ago. That's a really hard thing to say to someone because you will be breaking up with them, you'll be breaking their hearts, you'll be breaking your current living situation. It could have consequences on your finances as well. So there's really no good time to talk about it. And sometimes you're not going to ever have a right time and place you might just have to rip the band-aid off, which again makes it a difficult thing to do. During the conversation, it's important to actively listen. Don't listen to respond, listen to understand. Honestly, a lot of us do this where we are just listening to the words that the person is saying without really taking them in and understanding the meaning of those words. We just get very defensive and we block it off, and that can create miscommunication. The language that you use, if you're the person bringing up this conversation, is very important. Instead of saying to the person, you did X and that's why I'm mad, you can say, this behavior made me feel this way, or I feel concerned when XYZ happens. So the focus becomes more on you and how you're feeling or thinking about it, and it does not sound accusatory. We also don't want to overgeneralize by saying, oh, you always do this, or you never do this. I am guilty of this, guys. And that's why I have this self-growth podcast, because we're all growing. There's things for us all to learn, and no one is perfect. I've certainly done this in a difficult conversation or argument I bring up with someone. I say, oh, you never do this, or you're always doing XYZ, and that's not helpful to anybody. Once you say that to someone, they're immediately not going to listen to you. They're going to become defensive because it sounds like you're accusing them of doing something. Then they will either cut you off right there, or they won't listen to the rest of what you have to say. That's something that I've learned slowly, because think about if you're in their shoes. Nobody wants to hear someone say, oh, you're always doing this thing that hurts me. That's not cool. Nobody wants to hear that. So the person is likely to just wait to respond with their own thing. Language is very important. And my professor, who was a clinical psychologist in that class, really emphasized this point. Body language is another key thing when you're having that conversation. And this is another thing that I've struggled with as well that I'm trying to work on is, how do you keep your body language in check? How do you keep your facial expressions in check? Because for me, even if I don't say anything, if I'm in a particular conversation and someone says something, my eyebrows might shift a little bit. And I may be thinking, oh, I'm here with a poker face, but my expression is going to say otherwise, and the person will immediately clock that. That's difficult to do sometimes, just keeping it together like that. But I'm mentioning that because it is something that can also impact the conversation if you're making all these facial expressions, especially when the person is talking. In another case, if you're the listener, don't think, oh, they're accusing me of this, or they're bringing this up to upset me. Think of instead, why are they bringing up this issue? And really consider the conflict that is being brought up. And it can be hard, like I said, if someone is calling you out for something, but you really have to try and let them speak their piece. When I've been called out for behavior, I let the person say what they wanted to say. And because I cared about them, I wanted to make sure they got that out. You can also ask clarifying questions if someone is calling you out about something and you don't understand, or you see it differently or whatever it may be. Ask clarification questions. Part of these conversations is to have these clarification questions. And if you don't ask it, it could just create more confusion or miscommunication with that person. One thing I'll say as well is, it is good to have a stopping point in your head if you are the one starting the conversation. If that conversation starts to go left and out of control, for example, there's yelling or whatever, have a contingency plan to remove yourself from that conversation. Have a way to manage your emotions and find some common ground with that person. Managing our emotions during these times can be difficult. Again, something that I've struggled with. And it helps to kind of slow things down. Just take a pause. Sometimes you have to just say, you know what? Can we pause this conversation? I just need 30 seconds to think. Or I feel like I'm getting very angry here and I don't want to be. So can you just give me some time to reflect on what you've said? Or I just can't do this right now. It's okay to pause it. That situation might actually get worse, than when the person initially brought up the conversation. I think that's where things usually, in my past, that's where I used to get stuck at was when things go overboard, how do you actually stop it? And that's something that I've tried to do and incorporate is just say, I need to stop this conversation right now because I don't know what else I'm going to say. I don't want to make things be worse than they are. So that's something I am actively working on. It's hard though. It is really difficult, but slowing down is important. Making sure you're breathing properly. Just take some deep breaths. That seems really simple, but it can really work if you are in a high tense situation. Outside of pausing the conversation, like I said, you can also learn to manage your emotions, even if it's simply just taking some deep breaths, listening to something that can calm you down, meditating for a few minutes. If that doesn't happen when you're actually having that conversation calmly, one of the goals can be to find common ground with the person. For example, let's say you are married with a child who is struggling in school. Maybe dad believes that phase will pass and doesn't want to pressure their kid, while mom is worried and thinks immediate action is needed because the kid will fall behind. In this situation, the parents have different viewpoints on how to address the issue. In one scene, you could imagine they're both at odds of whether or not to do something. Maybe tensions get high, maybe they're using some strong words, and then they both just go to sleep angry and just decide, you know what, I don't want to have this conversation anymore. That could be one case, and that's very realistic. In another case, both parents express the thing that they would like for their kid, whether they want to do action or not. They have different viewpoints, but they realize in this case that the main common ground they have is their love for their child. Both of them love their child and want the best for them. So instead of us going back and forth and arguing about who is correct or what we should do, let's both sit down and once we acknowledge that commonality, we can both try to figure out what is best. Both expressing their worries is much more productive than saying that someone is wrong or someone is a bad parent. They can come to a middle ground where they calmly speak together. They can speak to their child, listen to the child's perspective. They can work with the teachers to try to figure out how to help their child. But in this situation, they're avoiding blame and finger pointing, especially when the stakes are so high, like with their child. There can be cases where maybe they tried to have a conversation and it did not work. They didn't agree on anything. They take some time, they come back, and then they have that more calming conversation. So a difficult conversation is not meant to be done in one swoop. Maybe you need to have several. Maybe it takes a little bit of time to understand each other. That's just human nature. But the goal would be to find a solution. In the example I gave about Bonnie and Clyde, the end goal there was to break up. Clyde brought that up because he wanted out of that situation. That also is not a simple conversation. Maybe they have one conversation, but they still live together. So they're going to probably have to have several more conversations as they figure out their next steps and what to do about this breakup. What happens then if we don't address these difficult conversations? Because, like I said, one of the things that happens is avoidance. People don't want to deal with the conversation that needs to be had. It can be difficult. You don't know how that person is going to react to what you say. You don't know what you're going to say that may trigger them in some way. If we don't have these conversations, though, it can create resentment in an already strained relationship. There can be further miscommunication. If keep in mind, this is a difficult conversation for a reason, and it's easy for tensions to rise and miscommunication to happen. One thing I like to keep in mind around this topic is that if someone brings up a conversation, give them the benefit of the doubt. At least hear them out, especially if it's the first time that this topic is being brought up. It can show you that they care enough about the situation to bring it up. Like in the example I gave of my family member or the two parents trying to figure out the best solution for their child, there may have already been arguing between you and this person and they don't want to keep dragging it out. Or like in the example about the couple that moved in, maybe it's just a conversation that you have to help you move forward in your life. The overall benefits of having these conversations is having improved relationships, which happened with me. You can have more clarity and closure about about a situation. It can also give you increased confidence or emotional intelligence when you're able to have these types of conversations because it's not easy and it helps you with any unresolved conflict. Because when you have these cases of unresolved conflict, that brings you stress, and stress is not good. Life already brings us stresses. Life already brings us things that we can't control. But if you're in a situation where you can control what's happening with you, then it is important to maybe bring up that conversation with the person. Ask them if they're willing to talk about it. Sometimes the other person doesn't want to address it. Maybe you're the only one. In the case of the intervention, the person, that woman eating cement, did not want to have that conversation, even though her family and friends had brought it up more than once to her. So I guess that's why they had the intervention. But a difficult conversation is not an intervention, just to make that clear. They can have some similarities, but in that case, the person was not receptive to having the conversation. And sometimes you might bring something up and the person says, I don't want to hear this. I'm over it, or I don't want to address this, or that's on you. I'm not involved in that. Whatever it may be, they may dismiss you. And in that case, you've tried. You can try again if you'd like, but sometimes they just go unresolved. And that's unfortunately one of those things of life that we can't control. That's one of those things that as I'm on this journey to figure out my life and myself, you really learn there are some battles you'll just lose. Some battles, just that's how it is. They're not to be won. You can try to do your best, but that is just part of it. Not to say you should be giving up. It's important to be realistic with ourselves, especially if there are certain areas of our lives that we want to improve. It's great to have that ambition to improve it. It's important to note that things don't always turn out the way we want them to. That silence or that barrier or that block may be the answer for you to give yourself that closure that you're not going to receive from them. Hopefully, not all of your difficult conversations go that way, but it's good to keep that in mind as well. I'll leave you with that for now. I do have some questions that I'd like you to think about. One, is there a conversation that you have been putting off that you want to address? If so, what is the outcome you want for that situation? And when would you want to address it? Because maybe it's something you don't want to address right now. It's not as important. So timing is good too. Thank you for listening to another episode of Lush Life, No Labels with Fatu. Leave me a review and let me know what you guys think about this show. Like and subscribe to Lush Life No Labels on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Cheers to your lush life and see you later.